It is time for another episode of the Cultural Hall, and I'm interested to see where this episode goes. Reading my daily subscription to the Rochester Post Bulletin, which you aren't subscribed to that newspaper. I'm surprised. I get that, and I get the Calaveras County Claim Jumper newspaper. I like to get all the small town rags, and surely I'm reading this a couple months ago now, and up pops an article, and the headline is Rochester Church of Latter-day Saints member speaks out on church's abuse issues, which you can probably guess made me go And I reached out to Michael Benjamin, who is my guest. Welcome in, Michael.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And we tried to get it to work out before, and I will fully take the weight of I don't know what happened. We chatted and we're like, yeah, let's chat. And then I was like, and then you came up again recently in like a media hit that sent something to me, and I was like, okay, this is a sign. General conference is over. We can stop predicting temples. It is time to talk with Michael Benjamin. So welcome in. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm not too bad. Let me ask you this. Rochester, born and raised, or a transplant, or what makes you out that way?
Yeah, so born and raised in Minnesota, so not in Rochester, but I was born and raised up in the Twin Cities area, so Minneapolis, St. Paul suburbs, and then went out to BYU for my bachelor's and master's degree in social work, worked out there, and then worked in Idaho for a little bit, and then moved back to Minnesota to work in Rochester, worked at the Mayo Clinic for a little bit, and then currently I'm at another mental health agency here in town.
So give me an idea of like what are you doing on the in and out of a day professionally?
Yeah, so on the in and out of a day, I provide outpatient therapy to children, adolescents, and their families. And then I also am part of a partial hospitalization program. So it's like a day treatment program for children and adolescents who need more than weekly outpatient therapy, but maybe don't meet criteria for inpatient hospitalization. So it's kind of a mid-level care. So I provide therapy to children and families who are in the partial hospitalization program. And then I also split some of my time doing just regular outpatient therapy.
And so would that be like if someone's like, oh, I'm off to see my therapist, that's outpatient therapy?
Correct. Yeah.
And then the hospitalization is like, I know that there's like these programs where like kids are there an entire day and they do like a group thing and then a private one-on-one and then like a team thing and then another thing. That's that kind of part-time thing.
Exactly. Yeah. The
Okay.
partial hospitalization program. They're in school for half the day and then they're receiving intensive therapy for the other half. So yeah, group therapy, individual therapy, meeting with team members. And it's like a 4 to 6 week program that they come for. And then we transition them back to school, hopefully successfully.
And is that for kids? I mean, we're going to be talking a bit about like abuse, signs of abuse, grooming, some of those things, the repercussions of abuse within the household, some of that. We'll get into all of those things. Is that the mainstay of the people that you see, or is it anyone who's needing help with anything and you're alongside them?
Yeah, it's any child or adolescent who's struggling with any sort of mental health issue. So it could be anxiety, depression, ADHD, grief and loss, trauma, attachment issues. So the whole spectrum of things. We have a program for eating disorders, another program for adolescents who are struggling with substance use issues. But I primarily work with elementary school age kids and then high school age kids who are dealing with a variety of different mental health issues. I would say my niche in the community, or kind of my training, is more with kids with trauma and attachment issues.
So this is my ignorance. When I think about things like what you do and like elementary school kids, I'm like, what in the world could an elementary school kid? This is obviously from a privileged point of view, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the worst thing that I ever experienced was the kid next door didn't want to play with me and he didn't invite me to his birthday party, and I was
Right.
like, oh, so. But I mean, pretty impactful, pretty meaningful to be able to get in a big T trauma kind of situation, if that is happening at an elementary school level rather than waiting until high school or adulthood.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm all for like early intervention. I think the earlier we can treat kids, the better. The better outcomes they have, the better prognosis. But yeah, it's sad actually to think about elementary school age kids who are experiencing big T or even little T traumas, right? The
Sure.
daily, parents yell at them, or neglect, the daily neglect, and then the big T traumas of sexual abuse and physical abuse and things like that.
Question that I would have about that is the headlines would lead me to believe that we've seen an exponential growth among children in the last, I don't know, let's just take for instance, the time that you have been working in the profession. Have you noticed it increase or a change within kids that we're seeing far more this than we did that? Or what is that sort of scenario as you look over your time?
Yeah, I think there's definitely been an increase in abuse, trauma, and trauma can be a whole number of different things. It could be loss of a family member, um, significant, medical procedures that are done, divorce, so all these different things that can happen. So I think there have been there's been an increase in kids experiencing traumatic events. And we
Mhm.
even think about COVID, right? I mean, just COVID and that kind of collective trauma that we all experienced. Um, I also think the reason we're seeing an increase is kids are more, talking about it more. I think it's something that is out there that people feel more comfortable talking about.
Which is
And I
good.
think,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Do, I guess when I think about it too, I think, man, that would just be so heartbreaking. Like it's heartbreaking for everyone, right? So let me clarify. It's just as heartbreaking for middle school, high school, or an
Right.
adult to go through trauma. But like specifically that age, I just think of that age for me being so innocent and so young
Hmm.
and so all of these things that it just seems like there would be an extra bit of, oh my, that would be
Yeah.
hard for me personally, I think.
Yeah, it is hard. It's hard to see. It's hard to, um, on a daily basis, work with kids who have experienced trauma or, like I said, attachment issues. But it's at the same time rewarding because therapy and medications help, and so it's also great to see that with a supportive environment and the right sort of treatments, that kids can get better.
And you actually probably really see them get better pretty
Yeah.
quickly, right? Because they also say kids can kind of adapt pretty quick, whereas adults are like, well, I know I
Yeah.
should put it off, put it off, put it off, and then it's years later. But kids, maybe is it a quicker pickup? Do you think for kids, or is that just a different person's personality?
Yeah, I think it depends on everybody's personality. And also, there's a lot of risk factors and protective factors that go into kids and their prognosis and their healing journey, where some kids with a lot of protective factors and good supports are going to maybe heal and recover quicker than kids who don't have that.
Yeah, is that what you always wanted to do?
Not always. I initially wanted to go into theater,
Okay.
surprisingly. And then I went on my mission. I went on my mission to Ecuador, and that had a life-changing impact on me. And then I came back from my mission, went back to BYU, and then wanted to become a doctor,
Hmm.
wanted to go pre-med. But my chemistry class persuaded me against becoming a doctor. I just wasn't good at it. And so I was like, well, I still want to help people. And this was like the next best thing, I think.
Yeah.
And I've loved it ever since.
What was the life change that happened in Ecuador?
Just seeing poverty, seeing people struggling with resources, and just being exposed, directly to people who, weren't. And again, coming from, as you said earlier, kind of a privileged background, right? It exposed me to a whole nother world that I just never experienced before, and really opened my eyes to um, just how the struggles that people deal with on a daily basis.
Yeah, I want to get into especially what the article is about, but I guess I have want to ask this question too. Um, there are lots of people that are struggling. How do you because I think everyone, I mean, really everyone could benefit from therapy, and
Hmm.
every kid could benefit from someone coming alongside them and being like, how we doing, what's going on, and especially in these bigger situations, how is it that you're able to be in that space and not just be overwhelmed or downtrodden, because the world is so hard and there's so much of all of these things. I it's an amazement that I have for individuals like yourself, where I'm like, yes, thank you, you've got to do it, because I think I would either try and save everyone and then end up saving no one, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Or, just become so jaded that then I'm just like, close the doors, the world is gone, we're over, it's done. How are you able to dwell in that?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to self-care. So I like to run. So running is my self-care. I like to listen to music. That's also a way to just for me to escape. I've also learned over the years to compartmentalize things. In between my bachelor's and master's degrees, I worked as a child protection worker in
Oh,
Utah.
geez.
Yeah, and that was hard, and made me decide to go back to school to get my master's to be a therapist, because I couldn't be a CPS worker for the rest of my life. And so, but during that time, as I worked as a CPS worker, I learned to really compartmentalize things, and that's helped. Just, to not bring work home with me. But definitely self-care, I would say, is the other big thing that I've learned to do over the years.
Well, the headline of the article says that you are speaking out on church's abuse issues, and I would love to know what the Rochester Bulletin is talking about.
I think they're talking about me being vocal within the community about this local sex abuse case that occurred within our Rochester, Minnesota stake. So I've been pretty public about my opinions and thoughts about that
For people
case.
that aren't familiar about that case, can you, basic set that stage of that case?
Yeah, I can try to give a brief high-level overview.
Warning, he's not a news person. He's just paraphrasing as he understands it. Okay.
Yes. So Michael Adam Davis is a registered sex offender from Utah. He was arrested twice, charged twice in Utah in, if I remember right, 2003 and 2006. Was put on the National Sex Offender Registry in Utah. And then he moved to Minnesota. We're not sure quite when. I think it was like in the early 2010s, potentially. Moved to Minnesota in a small town just west of Rochester called Casson, Minnesota. And he was, kind of fast forward, he was called to be the Elders Quorum president within the Casson branch. And during his time as the Elders Quorum president, was grooming young men. He had access to young men in the branch. And this will come up later, but if anyone has ever been in a branch before, so there's branches and wards. If anyone's ever been in a branch before, you know that you may have a certain calling, but you also just kind of help out wherever, because there's just not enough members to do all the duties within a branch. And so it came out that he was helping young men prepare the sacrament. He was taking young men on temple trips. So he had direct access with young men in the branch. So he was grooming some young men, and he eventually sexually abused a young man within the branch, and was caught when he was pulled over by police with the young man in his car. They weren't wearing seatbelts, and so they got pulled over on just like a regular traffic stop. And then the police ran his name, saw that he was a registered sex offender, saw that he was alone with this young man, which raised suspicions. Ultimately, this young man disclosed that Davis had sexually abused him. And then that hit the news, and that's where I got involved, because I saw the news, saw that this was a member of the church in the Casson branch, Elders Quorum president. And so it raised a lot of red flags for me. Number one, including, how did a registered sex offender get called to be an Elders Quorum president in a branch? That shouldn't have happened. So either, number one, the leaders in Utah didn't put a mark on his membership record. So there's annotations that they can put on membership records. So either the Utah leaders didn't do that when he became a registered sex offender, or the leaders here in Minnesota didn't look at the annotation or ignored the annotation, because he shouldn't have been put in a position of authority.
Well, so let me ask you a question about that.
Yeah.
And sometimes these questions, just so you know, I'm just trying to understand. Don't assume by any means that this is my point of view, but an Elders Quorum president would be in charge of only adults. I think that's, at least on the surface level, maybe you can enlighten me a little bit. That's certainly different than, if he was called to the nursery or to the primary or something like that. Or do you think, like, if someone has been on the sex offender registry, that like any sort of leadership calling would be inappropriate for that person? Or how does that work with our belief in repentance and a second chance and all that? Talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, my opinion is that as an elders quorum president, especially in a branch, like I said, they're going to have access to children, youth through just the nature of that calling.
Mm-hmm.
I think anyone who's a member of the church will know that the elders quorum president is a very respected position within the congregation, right? They're like second to the bishop, basically.
Sure.
And so I think just by nature of that calling, even though an elders quorum president might not have direct access to children or youth, I think there's a level of respect that, if the elders quorum president were to call up a family and say, hey, I want to come visit you, or I want to come take your son out for ice cream, the member, I think, would say, oh yeah, sure, go ahead. Because there's this level of trust that
Yeah.
I think members put in an elders quorum president. On top of that, I think, like I said, within a branch, um, there's even more contact that an elders quorum president might have
Mm-hmm.
with people in the congregation. And in this case, I mean, that proved to be true, right? He was actively involved with youth. He even was created a Book of Mormon challenge for the young men to participate in. That came out in the trial. So he was like actively, working with the youth, giving them these Book of Mormon reading challenges and things like that. And then I think even from like it used to be called home teaching, but now it's called ministering. The elders quorum president is going to be in charge of pairing youth with, other adult men in the ward. So there's going to be even some contact there, is my opinion. And I do believe in repentance. And I guess I don't know the situation around Michael Davis and where he was at with that. I think at a minimum, though, if someone is on a sex offender registry, there should be great caution in what callings they receive within a congregation.
Yeah, one of the words that you said, I want to kind of walk out a little bit, because I think just the same thing, like when we say someone is narcissistic or I have anxiety, there are these terms that are sort of blanketed out, and we all go, yeah, we know what that means. But if you really push, I don't know that everyone does. Grooming. What actually is grooming, or what is, hey, that's just a nice guy that is caring about my kids, and kids need another adult that they can talk to that aren't going to ground them and all that stuff. What is the difference in that and maybe some of those other things?
Yeah, I think that's where it gets confusing, especially within the church, because again, we're taught to respect our elders, and there's this level of trust within adults within the church. And that your question kind of even gets a little bit to these one-on-one worthiness interviews that youth have with leaders in the church. And there's like, to me, this is my opinion, a desensitization process that happens as youth are talking to adult leaders about very personal, private things
Mm-hmm.
that kind of desensitizes them to this idea of like, oh, I can share, these very personal, intimate details with an adult male, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
But to get to your question, I think grooming, and that way grooming differs in the sense that the adult is, buying gifts for the youth, treating them special, spending extra time with them,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, giving them things, calling them, taking them out. And in this case with Michael Adam Davis, that's what he was doing, right? He was treating these young men very special. He was buying them gifts. He gave them, a phone. He was having them over to his house alone. That's where, the red flags go up about grooming.
I want to take a break real quick. When we come back, I want to pick it up right there. Let's take a break and come back and do that in the second block of the Cultural Hall. Here in the second block of the Cultural Hall, remember that you can always email us if you like this episode, or you disagree with something being shared in this episode, or you have a great referral for another episode that we should do, maybe around this subject or another. It's contact@theculturalhall.com. And even when you wake up in the middle of the night and you can't sleep and you're thinking, what should I do to get back to sleep? You can send an email, contact@theculturalhall.com. So it's it's the buying the gifts, it's all the things that makes that person feel special and be able to open it up. So the headline is like, in this particular article, is like, Michael is doing this. I can't imagine that there are lots of people in your congregation that are like, nah, it's fine, don't worry. So what is it that makes it significant that you are being kind of highlight or spotlighted, that that this is about you and that you're speaking out?
I can only guess. I think it's because I was very vocal about it within the community.
But what is that? So I guess I'm asking, what does that mean?
Yeah.
You're being vocal. Is it like, this was horrible and this is my church and I don't like this? Is it you're going to meetings and you're like, I know this is about the Christmas tree project, but I need to let you know that Michael Adam Davis did this, and what was the vocal? How were you vocal
Yeah,
about it?
I guess a little bit of both. I was yeah, vocal within like the media, and saying, hey, this isn't okay. This shouldn't have happened. Um, you know, he was a registered sex offender in Utah. How did he get put in this position of authority here? I was speaking out about how the church needs to do criminal background checks on all of its leaders. I think that in and of itself would have saved this young man from being abused. If they would have run a background check before calling him to a position, it would have saved this young man, which to me is super sad.
Mm-hmm.
That, that one simple act that the church could do could save this young man, and probably, thousands of other kids. So I was speaking out about that. I was speaking out about the one-on-one worthiness interviews. I was speaking out about how clergy, are not required to follow the mandated reporter laws, at least here in Minnesota. I know in some states they are, but here in Minnesota,
And
there's
not in
no.
Utah either.
Okay.
Yep.
Um, and then I also spoke out. So when the branch president was released and then he went back to his home ward, which was my home ward, he was called to be a Sunday school president for the youth.
Mm-hmm.
And I emailed the parents of the youth in that Sunday school class just saying, hey, this is what's going on in our stake. This former branch president is now your youth Sunday school leader. Just wants you to be aware that he submitted an affidavit to support the perpetrator. And that's all I said. I just was kind of letting them know, like, this is the scenario, this is the situation. You guys can decide on your for yourselves if you feel it's okay for this former branch president to be teaching this youth Sunday school class, knowing that he, in my opinion, was defending the perpetrator in this case. So that was another way I guess I was speaking out. And so after I had sent that email to the parents of this Sunday school class, the stake president, without notifying me or talking to me, removed my access to my church membership account, or the LDS tools.
Yeah, to be able to message or call anybody in the ward, you're no
Yeah,
longer able to.
right. And it has like what your tithing and your journal and your scriptures and all that, your patriarchal blessing. So that was, they called Salt Lake, had that access removed from me after I had sent that email. So I guess in that way, those are the ways I was speaking out. So publicly and within the church.
So I mean, very aggressive as far as some of those actions go, especially in a group of people that I feel like a lot of times we're just like, well, they should probably know, or they do, or we.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of times that we are hands off about things where it's like, I don't know that I would do that, but that's not really my business. Maybe that's within the church. Maybe that's just people in general. Probably a lot of the profession that with what you see, you just felt like you had to tell the parents that to make sure that they knew, like, not an option to not tell them.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, in the heart of my heart, I'm a social worker, right? That's my degree. That's my life. That's what I do every day. So I feel very strongly about protecting children,
Sure.
and wanting the church to be a safe place. And so I think you nailed it. That's why I spoke out to those parents. That's why I spoke out publicly. That's why I was, posting all sorts of stuff on my social media, just to get the word out and let people know that this is happening and it's not okay.
As a response from either the parents or other people in the ward, because there had to have been at least a response. Anything is a response. What was that like as you got messages back from those parents, or after that kind of occurs within the ward? Is it, oh, that's that sticking his nose where it doesn't belong, Michael Benjamin?
It's been mixed. It's been some of that. It's been also support. Hey, thanks for speaking out. I couldn't do what you're doing. Thanks for saying something. And then I know of multiple families because of this case, who have left the church because of how the local stake leadership handled the situation. So it's been kind of all sorts of reactions. There's been people defending what the local leadership did. There's been people, like I said, who've left the church. There's been people who have spoken out against me, and also people who've been supportive.
Yeah. It maybe you could enlighten me. The people that would speak against you or like in favor, I mean, even just an affidavit, and I've heard of those things happening here where, some member of the church will go and, the bishop, thinking that he's doing well by that person, will say, I know he's a good person. I know he was drinking that one night and killed your entire family, but that's out of character for this. Like what possibly could be the, well, yeah, I mean, but he did do his calling really well, or like, what is I'm struggling to find a defense.
Yeah, me too. I mean, and in this particular case, what came out later after I went to higher up leaders within the church, I contacted an Area 70, Jeffrey Kerr. I don't know if he's still the area authority over our area, but he confirmed to me that those affidavits were written basically by church attorneys, and that the local leaders just basically like signed it, because they were identical affidavits, both claiming that Michael Adam Davis didn't have like direct authority or direct contact with kids in his position, which I guess technically is true, right?
Sure.
As an elders quorum president, he wasn't directly over youth programs, but that doesn't cover the fact that he was actually, working with youth, taking them to temple trips, helping them prepare the sacrament. So these affidavits were written by church attorneys, and I think, in my opinion, were an attempt to protect the church from anything.
Yeah, lawsuits or any of those kind of things.
Yeah.
And appreciative from the actual families that you sent some of the emails to, or was there any of them that's like, mind your own business?
Yeah, I would say from the families that I sent the email to, I didn't receive any like direct responses.
Yeah.
But I know that one of them must have forwarded my email on to my bishop and stake president, because then the day after, like 2 days later, that's when my membership account was blocked
without any sort of discussion with you. But then has there been discussion since where it's like, well, you shouldn't, and you're like, well, I'd like to have the phone numbers of people that I can call, or where does that particular situation stand?
Yeah, there's really been no discussion with me since. Stake leaders and local leaders have pretty much ghosted me for the most part. I did file a civil suit against them because a lot of my personal property was contained in my membership account. Like I had said earlier, my patriarchal blessing, my tithing donations, my scriptures, my notes, my journal. So I actually filed a civil suit against them last year to try to get my personal property back, the stuff that I created online. And they hired attorneys to actually fight me on it. Sure. And then ultimately we settled out of court, and I got access to my membership account back.
So maybe the hardest question, or a harder question, knowing that this occurs, we know that it occurs there. It occurs in Virginia. There are stories in Arizona, Utah. It is no geographical discrimination. It happens everywhere, and it's not just in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as well. It is lots of churches. It is lots of situations where parents are able, or where adults are able to interact with kids, etc. But this is your particular like faith and belief, and you served and taught people this and had life-changing experiences sharing the message of this, and then a lot of people will sort of dismiss it away and say things like, Michael, remember, the church is perfect, but the people aren't. And you're like, I don't know that I feel that in this thing, or are you able to, like you mentioned earlier, compartmentalize?
Yeah, I think that has been the hardest thing for me in all of this, is reconciling all of my faith experiences with this recent experience with this case, because it's called into question a lot of things, right? Like the power of discernment, right? Like if if our local leaders, truly have the power of discernment, why didn't, when they prayed over Michael Adam Davis being the Elders Quorum president, why didn't they get the revelation and inspiration that this was going to happen,
Yeah.
or that he
Or
shouldn't
even
be?
that, yeah, even that it was just a bad idea, not
Yeah,
necessarily this would happen, but
right,
yeah.
right, yeah. And so, then that starts me down the rabbit hole of like, okay, well, if they don't have the power of discernment, then what about everything else? And then it just, like I said, goes down the rabbit hole for me of all these other questions that I start to have. And then it calls into question too, just the organization and the lack of protection that exists within the church of, if are we annotating church membership records for registered sex offenders? Are we following those policies and protocols? What about doing criminal background checks on leaders? And so, those sorts of things also start to kind of waver my testimony and my faith. And so, yeah, and that's been hard for me because I haven't been able to reconcile that. And it's brought me to a lot of questions that I've had to face, and that's been hard.
Yeah. And it's interesting because one of the big pushes that I hear about background checks is, listen, it wouldn't even catch very many people. That what you have to have in order for it to be caught in a background check, you have to be accused or, it has to actually have gone through, and you have to, and all these different things about it. And yet in this particular scenario, it would have pinged instantly, and that
Yeah.
would have been a thing. And then you look at the fact that here in the United States, there are one or two, maybe half a dozen states that now require anyone working with youth to have a background check. The church in United Kingdom has now required background checks. I don't understand why at the point that these things are rolling out, and the fact that, as you mentioned, okay, so maybe it only saves 1%. Are we not taught to go after the 1%? Like,
exactly.
I don't understand these sweeping. Why we don't just go, hey, you know what? We founded Zion's Background Check Independent LLC, and that's our company, and now we send all of them to that. I don't understand, as a business or as a religious institution, why we wouldn't go, let's do this. This seems a simple, there's lots of other things, but a simple thing that we can just broad brush do and instantly have success with it.
Yeah. A very easy thing to do that could save, like I said, thousands of kids. Yeah.
And you see the turmoil and the the lives that are affected both currently and then down the road. You deal with those go, oh, this happened to you 10 years ago, and see what the life has become for those people.
Right. Yeah.
A few years ago, and we had him actually here in the Cultural Hall, a gentleman by the name of Sam Young. He spoke out quite a bit about, I think he was from Texas, as I recall. You can listen to that episode. I'll leave it in the show notes. But he talked about some of the very things that you talked about in like background checks, talked about being able for the youth to have like an escort or another person in the room as they're able to be interviewed. And that was before all of those changes occurred within the church. That gentleman was excommunicated from the church. And I actually am going to seek him out because I don't know what he's up to now. But are you worried about anything like that? Is it a moral judgment where you're like, yeah, but I'm not wrong. So if these people decide to do this, then that's on them. How do you feel about that sort of?
I mean, it's definitely a possibility for me to go to some sort of disciplinary council. I'm actually surprised that didn't happen when they took away my membership account privileges, because again, that was done behind my back without talking to me. So there was like disciplinary action taken against me without really having a disciplinary council. So I'm actually confused about that to this day. So I mean, I'm not worried. If that's what the local leaders decide to do, then I guess that's their decision.
Yeah, it's super difficult. As someone, so in my early 20s, excommunicated, that doesn't matter why, but it's interesting to me when I feel like I get lumped into some of these groups of other people who are also excommunicated, and I'm like, okay, am I the same as guy who built his own church, who killed a couple of kids? I'm not. Are we saying that that's what this is? whatever the thing is, and you facing potential church discipline for saying, can we be a little more safe with kids? Can we make sure that we annotate our church records properly? Seems
Right.
asinine to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. You mentioned earlier you're married. What has your wife thought about this whole thing?
She has been super supportive, and which I've really appreciated because, like I said earlier, this has been a hard journey as I've, questioned my faith and questioned some beliefs that have arisen because of this whole case. But she's been very, very supportive, and that's helped me get through this.
Are you able still to have a calling within your ward? You function as some sort of something within the ward that you worship, or are you not going to church anymore?
Yeah, so I haven't gone to church. My wife and I both haven't gone to church probably since COVID. We attended remotely when COVID was happening, and then once services went back in person, we just haven't been going. Interestingly, on that note, in the midst of all of this, I was released from my callings. Due to similar reasons, right? Because I was being vocal about different things. And so kind of right in the midst of all of this, my bishop released me from some callings and told me it was because I was speaking out about this and some other questions that I had about the church, mostly the November 2015 exclusion policy. I was being pretty vocal about that. And in that case, I was in classes asking questions and speaking out about that particular policy. But he removed me from being the ward chorister because, and these are his words, paraphrase, that he didn't want me in front of the congregation, being seen if I was having all of these doubts and questions and speaking out.
I want to take another break. When we come back, there are 3 questions we ask everyone who steps in the cultural hall. I'll ask those of you, plus a couple other things. We'll pick them up in the third block. Here in the third block of the Cultural Hall, remember you can always become a Patreon saint of the Cultural Hall. You go to patreon.com/the Cultural Hall. It gets you to be a part of the secret but not sacred Facebook group where all of us who are Patreon saints hang out, talk about things that are happening in the episode. Maybe we'll talk about Minnesota. Maybe we'll talk about, we do whatever we want in that group, and you are welcome to join it. It's patreon.com/the Cultural Hall. So, Michael, then, been a couple years, seriously, since COVID, even though it's still around now, and I'm pretty sure I had it like 2 weeks ago. When you think about the time, the experiences, the life change of Ecuador, and then you think of your time at BYU, and then you think of your time up until the point of you kind of speaking out and how much the church is a part of your life, of the very nature of who you are, both literally and figuratively. Like, is it an active wrestle where you're like, oh, or is it you've kind of put it on the back burner for a little bit and we're seeing it, or where do you stand today as we record this? It's the first part of October of 2023. Like, do you see yourself going back or not until someone apologizes, or where are you drawing a line? What are you at?
Yeah, I think where I'm at is I'm in a good place right now. I think I've come to terms with what's happened. As you were speaking about these life-changing experiences, my mission, going to BYU, meeting my wife at BYU, being married in the temple, all of my experiences throughout being a member of the church, I am super grateful for those experiences and what the church brought to my life as far as morals and values. And I think it's those same morals and values and being a seeker of truth that led to all of this happening, right? Because I in the midst of all this, I was, grounded in those morals and values that I actually got from the church, in being honest, in seeking truth, in protecting children, that led me to speak out. I think as a missionary, we're taught to speak out, right? And preach the gospel. And so to me, this is just like an extension of that, right? That I find this to be a very important issue. And the church taught me to speak out about the truth, and that's what I'm doing. And so it's interesting that, that's kind of number one, coming full circle, but also it's like almost backfiring on me in a way.
Yeah.
But I truly am grateful for, everything that the church has brought to my life. I mean, my love of music, is because of the church. My desire to serve people, is from the church. And so I won't forget any of that. And I'm at peace with where am now with, my name and my wife's and our children's names are still, on the records of the church. We just, aren't physically participating anymore, and
Do
that's
you,
okay.
do you consider this sort of like this whole string of events a trauma for
I
you?
do. I do. I think, in a lot of different ways. I mean, and maybe I know we can't compare traumas.
Sure,
I don't know
that's
if it would
right.
be a big T or a little T, but it's
Sure.
definitely rocked my world,
Yeah.
and has, I've felt a lot of betrayal by the church. I feel like I've gone through these stages of grief of, anger and sadness, and, and I feel like I'm nearing that acceptance phase. But it's definitely, yeah, it's rocked my world. It's, kind of shaken me to the core, and I think I'm at a really good place now. I'm the happiest I've ever been. My wife and I, and our relationship is the best it's ever been. And so I think it's definitely been a process.
It's a frustrating thing for me as I hear that. One, because I mean, I'm assuming and not knowing all of the things that you've spoken out about. I mean, you haven't said anything to me that I'm like, oh well, that's why. That clearly
Right.
that was the thing that he said. And the thing that I struggle with in any sort of things, and I think just groups, people, organizations find this, is that the dissenter or the different opinion, either we shun them and have that person out of the group, or they just get tired and go, you know what, I can't do this anymore, and it's not what we need.
Right. Right. And that's what's hurt the most is, as I spoke out about, like the 2015 exclusion policy,
Which, by
and
the way, was reversed, everybody.
right. I know.
So yeah, where were all
Yeah.
the people that were like, yeah, I actually agreed with you, I didn't dare say anything, but now we're all good? Or
Yeah.
yeah, I just yeah, sorry, I
And
didn't
so,
mean to
yeah,
interrupt that.
no, that's okay. I agree. I mean, and so when I was speaking out about that, and speaking, out for my LGBTQ brothers and sisters, there just didn't ever feel to be room, or space made for me in the church because of that. And that's what hurt the most, right? Like, um, that I thought there would be space for everybody, that there would be room for everybody. And when I started speaking out and asking questions, I felt like I was pushed out.
Hmm.
And I think I mean, was, by removing me from callings and, things like that.
Um, Question about sort of that part of like almost like a betrayal or a level of trauma. Those that are able to stay in the church and be able to continue to do it, do you think that it's that, and this is going to be speculation, and I'm asking you to do a thing that you're probably not going to be comfortable about doing. Do you think it's just a group of people that are sort of in the like denying, bargaining part of betrayal, and that's how they're able to stay within that place? Is no, I can make a difference. I can be this thing, and so they just sort of try and mold and make a place, or is it better that those people accept, hey, this is what this is, and exercise the agency and go, hey, if this is something that's different, I can knowingly and willingly come back? How would you speak to that maybe experience as opposed to being shunned or pushed out?
Yeah, I think the church works for people, at different times in their lives, and I would say it worked for me for a long time, right?
Mm-hmm.
It definitely worked for me, um, and so it might be working for those people. And yeah, I can't speculate on whether they're in that kind of bargaining phase
Sure.
of everything. I also think, and this is going to sound harsh and judgmental. I'm only speaking from, I guess, my experience of this, which is now being kind of on the outside of everything looking in. I definitely feel like I was conditioned into believing a lot of the things that I believed.
Hmm.
Um, and and so I think sometimes people within the church, um, continue to believe those things because that's what they've been taught to believe for, most of their lives.
Yeah.
And it's working for them. And if it's working for them, great. Like that's, more power to you. I know it worked for me for a while, and it isn't working anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that's okay.
Yeah, for sure. One of the greatest gifts I ever gave myself is when I got married a second time. I married someone who is not a member of the church, who asks me questions like, "Why do you do that?" and it's funny because I think if people are being honest, there are lots of things in life, but certainly within worship, that we just go, it's because that's what we do. And when someone's genuinely asking, like, why is it no, why do you do that way, that thing, that particular way, or believe that certain thing about that? And it's been a tremendous gift to be able to be like, okay, so I don't know.
Yeah.
And I'm going to get back to you. And maybe one of the scarier things for me is that I feel like sometimes people don't want to ask or won't ask because they may be afraid of what they're going to get as the answer. And the thing is, I think that you can be liberal and conservative. I think that you can be this and that and all the extreme opposites of the things, and that the doctrine of the church can still be true. But I just think that sometimes we go, well, it can't be this and that and still be true. You got to bend on one of those things, and I don't know.
I wish there was more space for asking questions, because I think that's what happened with me is when I started asking those questions. Yeah, there was no room or space for those questions. But I think there's value in being able to question ourselves and look at things from a different perspective.
Yeah, because the other side of what I was saying is now I know, like, I'm going to do this ministering because it matters to me and I care about these people. Whereas I'm like, no, it's just a thing I do every month. It's I'm supposed to. They assign me names. Why do I do this? Oh, because I actually find joy in caring for God's children. Okay, now I know it. So I think it can, we shy away from it because we go, whoa, what if they're gonna? But I think they're just as prevalent is the opportunity to become stronger within that. Let me ask you this, because everyone's got some ideas. We've alluded to some of them. We could do better within the church by background checks. That's an obvious one that we've sort of said. I think the church, at least to its efficacy, I'm not sure. They have if you're working with youth at all, here's a 30-minute slideshow that you need to know. And some of those principles within that, very, very helpful to avoid any sort of situation. What else could people employ if there are bishops or stake presidents or even just, teachers or Sunday school presidencies listening to something like this? What could they do?
Yeah, I think working with local legislators to get laws passed that will require clergy to follow the mandated reporter laws. I know that's starting to happen in some states. I'm actually working with someone here, to be determined, but we're in the works of talking with some local legislators here to get something happening here in Minnesota. I think getting rid of the one-on-one worthiness interviews, like I mentioned earlier, I think that desensitizes kids to talking about really personal, private things with adult men. That just sets the stage for that grooming to happen.
Is there any sort of value? Because the pushback on that will be, well, if people are going through, they've transgressed and they need the spiritual guidance of a bishop, and they're not going to say, listen, I got naked with my girlfriend with my dad sitting there. My dad will whoop me and then I'll never be able to see that girl again. How or should that situation occur where someone's able to talk about that? Or is it just not of value to be able to talk with an ecclesiastical leader about something like that?
Yeah, I think there's other ways of dealing with those sorts of situations. And I guess, that reaches a bigger question about just, how do we handle sin and repentance and, those sorts of things? Is that something that a leader has to deem you unworthy and tell you how to repent? Or is that something that you can personally, do yourself, and maybe, talk with a parent and a bishop in the same room without getting into specifics?
Sure.
Yeah.
What else? Any other sort of guidelines, things that people could go, yeah, this is something. The reason why I asked you the question about grooming is because I think that sometimes we just think, oh, that Brother Benjamin's just so nice. And it's like, that is not normal. Sleepovers at Brother Benjamin's house is not the thing that we do. Are there other things maybe along those kind of lines, or or something else that we should be aware of, be open-eyed about?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of those already exist, and I would hope that the church would just follow through on some of those policies. Always like the two deep leadership that we always talk about.
Mm-hmm.
We already referenced this as well, but like annotating membership records, and then I think just general, I think there could be better training for church leaders. We think about who's called to be bishops and branch presidents. They're all plumbers and electricians, and they don't have any training in how to handle abuse situations or marital relationship issues. And so just better like mental health training and training to so they can better recognize some of those concerns and then take appropriate action. And that would lead to my last suggestion, which is to get rid of the abuse hotline that the bishops have. I think bishops just need to report directly to law enforcement or child protection services and not go through a church attorney to manage these cases.
When we talk about like these cases, and there's been I referenced the sleepover at whatever house there, that was a case that was here in the state of Utah recently. Guy in the ward, I think he was in the primary or young men or something like that. And it was like, we have sleepovers at this unmarried guy's house. All the kids come over, and because he's a member of the church, he's in this position of authority within the ward. It wasn't like the bishop or anything like that, but people are like, yeah, of course you can go sleep over at this guy's house, which to me, I don't even have young kids. And I go, no. Like sleepovers at other kids' houses
right.
are a thing that you don't do, not also at an adult's house. How far do you think like an outright, when the church comments on things like this, it always says we grieve at the opportunity that that happened within the wall, right? How far do you think just something like someone saying, we're really sorry that this happened, not legal speak, not any of the other things, how far do you think that would take the church?
I think it would take the church a long way, and even for me personally would mean a lot, right? Even with this local case, if the church would have come out and taken some responsibility for what happened, apologized for the breakdown in the structure in the system, and I think that would have done a lot for me, and I think that would take the church a long way in healing some of the harm that's been done.
In the most recent article, you're mentioned as being affiliated with a nonprofit. Tell me a little bit about that real quick as we sort of wrap this out.
Are you referring to Floodlit?
Yes.
Okay, so floodlit.org, I don't think is a nonprofit yet. I think they're just it's a website.
Wait, you can just buy a domain?
Yeah, you can. So floodlit.org is a newer website that highlights Mormon sex abuse cases. It's like a database of all the different cases of Mormon members, church leaders, missionaries who have either been accused or convicted of sex abuse crimes. And it's a whole database. I think right now there's over 560 and growing number of cases. Just every day there's a new case that either is discovered or just a new one in the news. So I think it's a valuable resource for members to have, to either look in their area if there's a case that's happened, and also to advocate and provide evidence to local leaders about this issue, and to advocate for these changes that we were just talking about.
And ultimately for me, and why I beat this drum, probably people that listen to the Culture Hall are like, yeah, we get it, is we clearly don't get it.
Yeah.
When you have incidences, there was one a couple months here where the kid, the teenage child, went to the bathroom during sacrament meeting and was sexually assaulted, in that time, or propositioned or something like that. It's like, there's still, it's all the time. It's all the time. Be aware of all the things. And that's what I appreciate so much about what you said, saying, hey, you know what? I'm not meddling. This guy was in this position. Here's an email. You should know what this is. It's just information. Do with it what you will, but to be uninformed is not what God wants us to do, first of all. And second of all, like it doesn't help you as an individual make an educated choice. So
Yeah.
We feel the same. I hope they're not going to close down my tools. I got to, I need to know where the people in my ward live and their phone numbers so I can crank call them. Michael, there are 3 questions that we ask everyone in the cultural hall that steps in. I sort of know at least the one of them. The first one is, do you have a calling? And if so, what is it? And you don't. The second is, if you could pick a calling, you go back to church this next Sunday and they say, you know what, we're sorry for all the things, but you get to pick the calling. That's how sorry we are. What would you pick? What would you go do?
Ooh, I would pick either primary pianist or ward pianist or organist, or the ward choir, or the ward just music director, like for the sacrament.
Perfect. And then the last thing that we ask everyone, we ask you to interpret it however you may, but the question that we ask is, what is your favorite part of your faith?
The favorite part of my faith. I think that it instills in me the desire to serve others. And I think that's at the heart of everything I do every day, in my job and in everything that I do, even with my family and friends, is serving others. And I think that's the thing that I enjoy the most.
On the front line doing some of the hardest work, I think. I'm so grateful that there are people like you that can get in there and sit in the with people and be able to help them through those things. It's a tremendous thing that I don't know that I feel like I could do, but I'm grateful for you for speaking up and for saying something that needs to be said and said again. And then just when we think we haven't said it enough, a couple more times we could
say it again. Yeah.
It's Michael Benjamin. The website is floodlit.org if people want to check out that database. Is that correct?
Yep. Floodlit.org. Yeah.
Well, we hope that this episode has nourished and strengthened your body. And if that you're not healthy enough to listen this week, that you'll be healthy enough to listen next week. And that when the time comes, you will be able to travel home in safety. In the meantime, we'll be saving a seat for you on the back row of the Cultural Hall.